Hello, my name is Alexi. Want to make a video about the topics that I've been kind of studied for in out uh, through different times and seen things. Um, Hopefully, Lord willing, it's you know as a single person, it would never happen. But at the same time, think I can kind of reason clearly where I notice where people who've been divorced and remarried, like one particular preacher back in Louisiana, he would say that, oh, if you forbid me to remarry, like so he was already divorced, but now he wants to remarry, then he would twist First Timothy 4 saying that you are, if you forbid him to remarry, then you under the doctrine of demons. So some folks get really emotional and I think in some cases start twisting scriptures. So sometimes the topic like that handled by a single person, honestly, it's more of a less subjective and more objective. So, you can do whatever you want to do. You can listen or don't listen. I really don't care. So let's look at it, some of the texts. So Jeremiah 3 verse 6 through 9, it says this. The Lord said to me in the days of King Josiah, have you seen what she, that faithless one, Israel, how she went up to every high hill and under every green tree, and there played the whore? And I thought, after she has done all this, she will return to me, but she did not return. And her treacherous sister Judah saw it. Uh, she saw that for all the adulteries of that faithless one, Israel, I had sent her away with a decree of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear, but she went and played the whore because she took her whoredom lightly. She polluted the land, committing adultery with the stone and tree. So notice this. God speaking to the Israel and Judah, and to the Judah once again. And notice what God says. And she saw that for all the adulteries that faithless one Israel, I had sent her away with a decree of divorce. So God divorced Israel. I would say that like in the book of Revelation talks about a small scroll. I would say that it's kind of like I give you big kind of like overview of eschatology. Where is it? Where is it? Like I give you like quick view of eschatology where pretty much God made a covenant with like I would say particularly with the nation of Israel, with Moses, because those old covenants, I should say, like with Moses. Then God made like covenant with what's the name, King David, bunch of other people, Solomon. But let's just say like old covenants as a whole, sort of old covenant. Old Testament, but Old Covenants, Old Testaments. But so Christ coming in, he still lives under the Old Covenant. He fulfills Old Covenant law. Yet, meanwhile, his ministry, like what some people, I mean, different people say different things, like it's 27 AD through 30 AD, or 30 AD through till 33 AD, but one of those dates. But during the ministry time, Christ already like preaching new wine. Like, I'm sorry, like on Sermon on the Mount, that's like crystal clear to me that, you know, especially about the divorce, that's a new thing right there. That's a new teaching. So Christ started in the process establishing new covenant, new law, new commandments. So Christ dies on the cross. He fulfills old covenant law right there, while establishing the fullness of the new covenant. And then you have the cross and resurrection and the Pentecost. So fulfillment of Pentecost is important because now Christ sends the Spirit upon believers. Where in the Old Testament, I would say that Spirit came upon certain people and left whenever the job is done. Read Samson, for example. The Spirit rushed upon him, he killed a bunch of people and left. So I would say that new covenant has been established on the cross, and then at 70 AD, with destruction of Jerusalem, pretty much God signs a certificate of divorce with nation of Israel, and now the church, like, you know, is unquestionable the bride of Christ, consists of Jew or Gentile, regardless of Jew or Gentile. As long as you believe in Christ, you are collectively speaking the bride of Christ, the church. And then either when you die or at the second coming, the fullness of consummation of the church will come, which I don't know, and I believe the Bible says nobody knows when Christ can come. So, going back to like Malachi's, because I know preachers use this verse, like verse 16. So Malachi 2 verse 16 says, for the man who does not love his wife but divorces her, says the Lord, the God of Israel, covers his garment with violence, says the Lord of hosts. So guard yourself in your spirit and do not be faithless. So I'm not quite sure, honestly. Like, people trying to simplify it, like God hates divorce, but it's just, I don't know. I mean, I looked at Hebrew, and I'm just like, where did he get this? You know, he hated away, putting her away for the one coward's violence. It's like, I mean, people trying to simplify it, and I'm just like, it's kind of switching from, if you look at verse 11, Judah has been faithless, an abomination has been committed in Israel, and in Jerusalem, for Judah has profaned the sanctuary of the Lord, which he loves, and has married the daughter of a foreign god. So, I mean, it's mostly like, if you look at Malachi, just notice it speaks to the nation of Israel as a whole. So, and yes, he does address like divorce as like a the wife of your youth and stuff like that. But it's really like, I wonder why preachers just preach on that verse and not focusing on New Testament, particularly what Christ has said about divorce. So an interesting thing, like I'm gonna actually go back to the verses about lust, but because later on some preachers believe like, hey, if a husband looks at the pornography, the wife have the right to divorce your husband, which I would say no. I believe it is adultery in the eyes of God. However, the wife should not divorce your husband if he looks at pornography. First of all, like, find any couple where a husband and a wife would say, I never looked at another person except my spouse with lust. I mean, it's no, I'm sorry. It's like all of us, like, talking to men and women, like, yes, women, like, notice what Christ says. It doesn't say, look, check this out. Matthew 5:27-30, it says this. You have heard that it says, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with with lustful intention has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, to tear it out and throw it away, for it is better that you lose one of your members that your whole body be thrown into the fire. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away, for it is better that you lose one of your members that your whole body go into hell. So why is it just looking at the pornography? How about like if a husband looks at the lust at a random woman in like a Walmart or like place of shopping or mall or gas station, whatever. I mean, be honest, man. Like, if you're watching this, like, yeah, you may not looked at pornography for some years, but let's be honest. Have you looked at the woman with lust in any place? And the same question would be for a woman. If you're a woman and you want to divorce your husband because he looks at pornography, have you yourself never looked at another man with lust? Doesn't matter, it's pornography or some magazine or at the gas station or at the gym, whatever. I know you had, don't lie. So the point I'm trying to make is that yeah, I believe that there's a case for a biblical divorce and remarriage, but it have to be a physical adultery, not a just a sin of heart or sin of within this person's head. So let's look at what Christ says. Matthew 5:31 verses 32. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So notice this. So everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. Like, interesting thing is that it's not the husband is the one who commits adultery in this case, in this particular verse, but he actually makes her, I guess, ex-wife commit adultery unless she herself committed sexual immorality. So what's the name? And notice this in the Old Testament, that woman will be stoned to death. But at the same time, in some cases, I think, like, for example, like Joseph, he tried to divorce Mary in secret, where, they're like, oh, I don't want her to be stoned to death, so he's being merciful. But in a new covenant, we should not stone people to death. It was an Old Testament, Old Covenant, Old Law of Moses. We are under the New Covenant and under the law of Christ. So everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, like I said, like if she's physically committed adultery, and if he divorces her, then he would make her commit adultery. And whoever, notice this, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So there's two ways. So one way is that if a husband divorces his wife and she did not commit adultery, and I mean, it seems like it's almost like she's innocent. Like, well, she didn't commit adultery then, but interesting thing, it says that makes her commit adultery. So it's almost like there's no technically innocent parties in this divorce. But at the same time, honestly, like when I look at the Sermon on the Mountain, I'm not really looking at it as oh, do this and do that. That's more of like, as a whole sermon, I see like, you are condemned, you deserve hell. That's pretty much like, first time I read the Sermon on the Mountain, it was not like, oh, I do this or do I do that. It's like, no, I'm going to hell the first time I read it, under conviction of the Holy Spirit. I don't believe at that time I was a Christian yet, so no, I was not a Christian that time. I was still kind of like a channel, use my works to get to God. So I would say no, at that time I was not a Christian, but I did realize that Sermon on the Mount as a whole is not like do this or do that. It's about like, you are condemned, you deserve hell. It's like, one of the verses that Christ, or one of the sentences Christ spoke, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Like, who can accomplish that? I would like to meet that person. But anyway, so notice that a wife who did not commit sexual immorality, like I said, have to be physical sexual immorality, then the husband actually would make her commit adultery by doing so. And then interesting thing, like, so like, for example, an unbelieving husband, let's just say, he would like, well, actually, let's postpone this, 1 Corinthians 7, but like, let's just say, okay, both Christians, or at least confessing to be Christians, husband and a wife, and a husband says, look, you are not cooking good enough food, get out of here, I'm tired of you, you don't pay attention, you don't listen to me, get out, are divorcing you. So by doing so, actually, the husband makes her commit adultery. And then she would go, and this woman go by herself, and she finds a man, and this guy actually trying to take care of her, and he marries her. An interesting thing, like whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So, how you want to cut it, but it's just like, even though she may not, like, notice this, so the husband, everyone, like referring to the husband to man, because in the Old Testament or even in the first century, women would not be able to initiate divorce. Like women technically didn't really have the same rights as men. It's just the bottom line. So everyone or every man who divorces his wife except on the grounds of sexual immorality makes her commit adultery. Like, in the first century, women had like, they didn't really had much of options in a sense of income. Yeah, there was like, I forgot her name. In Book of Acts, she was selling some different things of purple clothes, whatever. But there was only few options available for a woman to actually able to provide for herself if her husband dies. So she would have to marry a man, and by doing so, if her husband divorced her except on the ground of sexual immorality, he would make her commit adultery. And the man, like trying to be this knight in shining armor, he's like, oh yeah, I'll marry her, even though because the other husband neglected her, just kick her out for unlawful reason. This guy who actually marries divorced woman commits adultery. At least that's what I see. So next text, Matthew 19 verse 1 through 12. Now when Jesus had finished those sayings, he went away from Galilee and entered the region of Judea beyond the Jordan, and the large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. And the Pharisees came up to him and tested him by asking, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? And he answered, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. So notice this. Let not man separate. But we have, people, lawyers, have trying to separate the two, trying to separate one into two. Then they ask him this. They said to him, why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to send her away? And he said to them, because of your hardness of your heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning, it was not so. So he gives, Christ explains why, but still, divorce is divorce. And notice next word. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except on sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. So now, let's just say a man, for example, like his wife does not commit adultery, but he decides, you know what, she's ugly. Here we go. His wife became ugly, she became old, and he's like, you know what, get out of here, old woman. So she goes, and he marries another, and by marrying another, he commits adultery. Notice this, except for sexual immorality, and I kind of explained this, that I would say it have to be like sexual immorality physically performed. It cannot be just in the mind, like, you know, it's like I said, why many preachers just say, well, if he looks at pornography, then you have the right to divorce, but then like you yourself who may not even look at the pornography, but you yourself who goes to Walmart to a gym or just, you know, driving on the street, how many times in while you've been married you already looked at the woman with lust, either on a billboard or at the grocery store or wherever, too many times. And then you instructing a woman to just divorce her husband because he looks at pornography, which is a sin. I yes agree, looking at pornography is a sin. How I would say it's not, it doesn't give a woman or a man to divorce her husband, his or her spouse. Then continue on. The disciples said to him, if such is the case, a man with his wife, it is better not to marry. Oh, so they got it right. They're like, wow, this is that's like that's a big mark right there. That's something different that they have not read in Deuteronomy. That's what Christ taught. And watch in verse 11. But he said to them, not everyone can receive this saying, but only those to whom it is given. So notice this, only to those whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let the one who is able to receive this receive it. So an eunuch is pretty much a person who unable to, you know, have sexual intercourse. Let's just say that. But interesting thing is like in church history there were some Christians who literally mutilated their body. At least that's what some of them thought. That's what this verse meant. And I'm like, well, what's the name? Yeah, if you cannot, you know, it's just like, but then I want to get back to this concept in 1 Corinthians 7, because he talks about if you burn with passion, it's better for you to marry than burn with passion. But quite same idea comes in Mark chapter 10, verse 1 through 12. But I want you to see the difference. So Mark 10, verse 1 through 12. And he left there and went to the region of Judea and beyond the Jordan, and the crowds gathered to him again and again, as was his custom, he taught them. And the Pharisees came up in order to test him, asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" He answered them, "What did Moses command you?" They said, "Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away." And Jesus said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, he wrote you this commandment. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate." And in the house of disciples asked him again about this matter. And he said to them, notice, he's speaking to his disciples in the house. So, and in the house, the disciples asked him again about this matter. And he said to them, "Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, commits adultery. She commits adultery." So I'm not quite sure if it's translation or what, but let's look it up. Is it the right one? So Mark chapter 10. And if a woman, yeah, so that's the right one, shall put away her husband, yeah, and be married to another, she committeth adultery. So yeah, that's the right translation. So if she divorces, but she divorces and marries another, she commits adultery. So yep, and there's no exception clause. Well, I would say that Matthew is mostly word for word, where Mark is more of a summary of different things, and Mark's what's his name? Mark's focus is not really on commands of Christ, but more of his actions. So yeah, so to me it's either or. Like I said, like I believe there's a lawful and unlawful divorce, and like there's only one lawful. It's like when a wife or husband physically commits adultery or sexual immorality. Uh, sometimes honestly, it's like I don't want to go into like how you call it, um, how you call it, being explicit, like some preachers are, but sometimes almost it's like it's necessary to. So like when a female body part pretty much either a female body part being penetrated by a man who is not her husband, that's adultery. Or any body part touches sexually who is not her spouse, that's adultery. So which is the case for divorce. So 1 Corinthians 7, the favorite passage. By the way, there's First Corinthians 7 actually deals in twice. So let me go to the First Corinthians 7 verse 10 through 16 first. Let's look at it. To the married I give this charge, not I, but the Lord. The wife, notice this. So the Lord, the wife should not separate from her husband. But if she does, she should remain unmarried. So if she divorces or separates, like interesting, like I want to see like in Greek, what's the separate means? Does it actually means divorce or like living away from each other? If she departs, goes away, chirozo verses verse 11. Okay, chirozo. Is it chirozo in Matthew 5 as well? Let's see. Put, okay, away, whoever shall, divorcement, apostasion, divorcement, put her away, Apollo, put her away, commits adultery, Apollo, so moichiao, so divorce in Matthew in in Greek is apostasion or Apollo. So let's look at the First Corinthians. So so she chorizo. So if she departs, let her remain unmarried, or be reconciled to her husband, and let not the husband put away. That's a different word. Put away. Aphemaimi, left, forgive, suffer, but it's not divorce. It's not the same word. So if the wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should. So if she does, she should remain unmarried, or else be reconciled to her husband, and the husband should not divorce his wife. So the husband should not divorce his wife. And the rest I say, I, not the Lord. If any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever, and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. So if any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. But if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such case, the brother or sister is not enslaved. God has called you to peace. For how do you know, wife, whether you save your husband, or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? So the question is this. So first of all, what I see is that believing spouse, whether man or woman, they don't have the right to initiate divorce. So if your wife and you are Christian, you have no right to initiate divorce. Only unbelieving spouse or unbelieving husband can initiate divorce. If you are believing husband, you have no right to initiate divorce. Your unbelieving wife is the one who initiates the divorce. So, but if they don't initiate, you have to live with them. But the question is this: what does it mean that it says in verse 15, but if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such cases, the brother or sister is not enslaved. What does it mean? Let's look at it in Greek. So, what does it mean? Not under bondage or enslavement. So, what does it mean? Does it mean that, okay, if the unbelieving spouse, for example, unbelieving husband, for example, says, I'm divorcing you because of Christianity, and the Christian wife, now she's not enslaved in the sense of, oh, now I can just marry whoever I want to marry? Or does she have to uh, abide by what's the verses before, which talks about if she should remain, or the wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried, or else be reconciled to her husband. The husband should not divorce his wife. So, like, notice this, like, Paul already answered that question. So, if the for example, if unbelieving spouse, I think it applies both, because marriage is honorable among all men. So if the wife, for example, if the husband, for example, divorces his wife who is unbeliever, and he himself stays as single, but unbelieving spouses or ex-spouses usually quick find a either new wife, or just start fornicating, then I would say, since now it's a physical adultery upon that spouse, then that Christian spouse, like, on whom adultery has been committed, then that person can remarry whoever she wants in the Lord. So that would be like my understanding in 1 Corinthians 7. But like later on talks about sign, call him a church. So free gave the price, like let him remain. Okay, so going back to verse 27, are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be free. Are you free from the wife? Do not seek a wife. But if you do marry, you have not sinned. And if a betrothed woman marries, she has not sinned. Yet those who marry will those who marry will have worldly troubles, and I would spare you that. That is what I mean, brothers. The appointed time has grown very short. From now on, those who have wives live as those they do had not none. Um, so okay, and the married actual things, betrothed, how to be holy in the body and the spirit, but the married woman is anxious about worldly things, how to please her husband. Yeah, but okay, in Zen it says this: a wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives, but if he dies, if her husband dies, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. So, what's the name? If, for example, if we have a moral husband, unbelieving, like for example, let's just say a Christian wife, well, let's just say an unbelieving husband divorces um, a Christian wife, and he's a moral man, he's not a Christian, but he's moral, and he does not go out to like nightclubs and like goes to prostitutes or like whatever. He actually moral person, and he does not marry to somebody else. He does not commit adultery. Uh, he just lives by himself. So the Christian wife, according to that verse, she would have to stay single. She would have to remain single and wait either till her husband dies or they would reconcile. So, which in United States would be like almost like nowhere to be found, but still could be a case maybe in other countries. Uh, so that would be like whatever. I hope it's kind of been helpful to you, but interesting thing later on. So which verse we talked about? Oh yeah, so 1 Corinthians 7 verse 39. Because interesting thing, Paul later on writes in different letter in Romans, and it says this: or do you not know, brothers, if I am speaking to those who know the law, that the law is bounding on a person only as long as he lives? For a married woman is bound by law to her husband while he lives, but if her husband dies, she is released from the law of marriage. Accordingly, if she will be accordingly she will be called an adulteress if she lives with another man while her husband is alive. But if your husband dies, she's free from that law, and if she marries another man, she is not an adulteress. So, the previous point is that, look, if an unbelieving spouse divorces a Christian spouse, and this person lives, I guess, more alive, he doesn't, you know, guess American word would be partying, or just call it fornicating or sleeping around, and he would not divorce. I mean, he would not, after divorce, he would not marry somebody else. Christian spouse or Christian ex-spouse, she would have to remain single till either that husband dies or this person actually commits physical adultery. And the last point is that, I have seen too many Christians. There's like so many things, like, which I would say common unbiblical so-called Christian reasons for divorce are husband looks at the pornography, and like I said, why is it just pornography? Why is it just a general lust for women, like in a grocery store or whatever? I mean, even wives or women, if you ask them, have you ever looked at a man with lust who is not your husband? And let's be honest, you had. You say from the time of what's you married till now, and it's like if you married in more than a year, I mean, let's be honest, you had. Then it says some people would say domestic violence. Well, with domestic violence, a couple of years ago, I read Richard Baxter called Godly Home, and it's like, you know, Mr. Baxter would pretty much recommend for a woman to just be a martyr, to just be killed by her husband in domestic violence. But of course, this so-called Church of England and everybody was claimed to be Christian because of baptism is just totally nonsense and total false. But first and foremost, okay, let's just say if a husband claims to be Christian and he beats his wife, then the wife should go and get 2 or 3 witnesses with him. Like, look, he beats me. Because some cases, honestly, it's like it's in domestic violence so weird, because honestly it's mind-boggling. Because in some cases, actually, not every case, but in some cases, wife would actually cause herself a bodily harm in order to get a custody over children or more money from divorce, etc. So, like, if you're a Christian spouse, if you're, like, for example, if your wife and your husband, who also claims to be Christian, yeah, get a couple of people with you and confront. And it's like, look, you might be put out to church next time. And if he doesn't stop, yeah, you put him out to church. And the wife, I would recommend, um, in sense, the church is not just it should be, at least it should not be just a Sunday thing only. It should be a community where a person could receive help to, live with some other family for a while, maybe get, adopted and like start working again. So yeah, but she have no right to divorce her husband, even though it's domestic violence. And some domestic violence I saw, it's like it's just like a street fight, and some men would not, you know uh, I call it in English, pull up punches. They would punch their wives as hard as they could, as they would punch another dude. So that would be my solutions. And like I said, yeah, you have no right to divorce your husband, even though he punched you. Next one is like a drug slash alcohol addiction. Well, this one is, you know, other sins that also with some, I don't believe it's biblical to divorce, to a reason for divorce, and I would say it's if the person divorces and they marry another one, that's because of those domestic violence, because of pornography, because of drugs slash alcohol addiction, because of neglect of physical needs, or not compatible personalities slash goals. Like you know what? Yeah. So drugs, like if he's alcoholic, just get a job. Like if you're a woman and he's alcoholic, get a job and start providing for yourself. But you still have no reason for divorce. I understand it sounds harsh, but that's the way it is. And then neglect of physical needs, like it's could be either, you know what? I'll put down even physical slash sexual needs. Um, what's his name? Like physical needs, like for example, if he just lazy person and would not work. Well, technically, if he claims to be Christian, then he's a worse than unbeliever. So, yeah, then I would really doubt his salvation. But so yeah, if for example, if a wife she been a home home spouse, like home mother and stuff, then she would have to get a job and start providing for herself. But she have no right to divorce her husband, even though he's a worse unbeliever. In regards to sexual needs, it's like, first of all, like the marriage was one of the things why marriage was given. Notice this. Um, but because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. The husband should not, the husband should give his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. And conjugal rights, let's just be frank, or let's see if benevolence or will or duty, conjugal rights, benevolence, goodwill. Um, let's just say, yeah, pretty much conjugal rights, like in prison, it's pretty much having sex. Let with some a wife should give. They should not be like, well, he has not been a Romeo to me, so he didn't bring me flowers today or make me laugh, therefore he cannot have sex. No, it doesn't matter. That's your duty. Yeah, it's pretty much your duty. Like, if you're a wife, you know, you should fulfill your marital duty, which is allowing your husband have sex, and other way around. Um, so yeah, neglect of sexual needs, and I know some. I mean, some of the stories I was listening to, I was just like, oh wow, I can't listen to this anymore. This is insane. But some people, like, I think there was one pastor's like, well, if you didn't have sex with your spouse more than a year, you need to contact me. It's like, for what? No, no, you need to communicate with your wife. Like, hey, honey, that's your duty. for me to sleep with you. If not, if she's still, well, honestly, like, what I think the problem is that, like, because women are super exhausted after working all day, and then taking care of kids, and then whatever left over is really nothing really left in the gas tank. They're super tired and they're like, oh, I can't have sex because I'm super tired. Well, to some degree, it's because you've been greedy. Instead of making her being a housewife and staying at home so that she could just take care of kids and rest, now she's super exhausted and she have no energy with you to have sex. To some degree, some man, you brought this up upon yourself. So, but anyway, so, but regardless, like, either your wife is working, even I mean, it is kind of like sounds cruel, but I mean, well, to a degree, honestly, like, yeah, it's like, I don't know, you know what? It is sounds cruel because, like, if your wife is super tired and you just want to live in this mansion house or 5 bedroom house, and you're like, oh man, you gotta work too, baby, you know? It's like, no, it's better to have little and, you know, instead of living in a mansion and your wife is just always exhausted and she have nothing, no no bel- beloved, I can't even pronounce this word, no love towards you, no energy to give you in bed. It's horrible. No, it's like, it's better to live in an apartment. I mean, it's almost like, you know, honestly, like, in many churches it's almost like it's a sin to live in an apartment and being married at the same time. And it's just, you guys been blind by American dream. With food and clothes you shall be content. It's like, you know, it's ridiculous. It's like, you know, sometimes want to send all those middle class and upper class Americans to, like, Mexico, like somewhere where there's a really bad poverty and stuff, or like somewhere in Africa besides like this South Africa, which is kind of not too bad, but like regions of like Somalia or Sierra Leone, or like even North Korea, or even some parts of Russia, where people, like, if they literally have like food and clothes, and some families like in Russia, they have like 1 bedroom apartment, and there is like old father and mother and one of the kids who is married, one of the like grown children who is married and have his wife, and the wife already have 1 kid. They live in one apartment, like, and they have like a barrier, almost like, you know, like a, how I call this, like a, you know, bookshelf across overs, and, you know, that's how some people live in Russia. So sometimes, like, honestly, like, uh, why in American families I notice wives would not give um, conjugal rights is because of greed, you know? It's like, or not being content with food and clothes and living in an apartment. Like, ridiculous. And like I said, that's an unbiblical reason for divorce, which is, I would call, adultery. Like, living in a sense of living in adultery. Another one is like not compatible personalities or goals. In America, United States, um, the role of a husband is the head of his wife, 1 Corinthians 11, and the wife should just submit to him in everything as unto the Lord. So like I hear a couple, my wife wants to become like a missionary and I don't. No, look, husband decides what her place is. So if a wife thinks that she's been called to be a missionary, she better marry a man who also wants to be a missionary. And if the husband would not or does not want to be a missionary, guess what? You're not gonna be a missionary. Simple as that. Because husband is the head of his wife. And if a woman marries a man and she does not want to be a missionary, yet her husband wants to be a missionary, guess what? You automatically gonna be a missionary to the places where you may not want to go, and the places where there's lots of dirt and poverty and people die every day on the street and lacking food and clothes. Guess what? If you married a man who called to be an evangelist and you don't want to go, guess what, woman, you're gonna go because he's your head. Simple as that. So compare personalities, to me that's just the most ridiculous thing. That's just, you know, need a, if you have a problem like I know like some women do, like, oh, we're not compatible, our personalities are different. So what? You already made a commitment. Yeah, it's like you need to turn off your TV, stop talking to your unbelieving friends about a marriage, start reading the Bible, and if you still divorce your husband because of not not like your personalities are different, guess what? Honestly, if you divorce your husband, or because that's what mostly been noticing, if you divorce your husband because you're non-compatible personality-wise, I would doubt your salvation. You know, I would really doubt if you're truly born again. I mean, in fact, if you don't reconcile with your husband and you claim to be Christian for the rest of your life, I'll be like, you know, it's gonna be really, it's gonna be tough. I don't know. So, hope this video been a blessing. If I'm wrong, please correct me. And that's it. Have a nice day or night or whatever it is. Bye bye.